Yes. Now our next focus, and it's on the IMF. In response to a request from the Deputy Minister of Finance, a Fiscal Affairs Department Capacity Development Mission took place in Tbilisi from November 6 to 25, 2019. The mission provided guidance on compiling, analyzing and using the public sector balance sheet, meeting with almost every responsible public sector entity and also local and international experts. The mission also held workshops on the public sector balance sheet for the Ministry of Finance and National Bank of Georgia and state-owned enterprises financial analysis for the Fiscal Risk Division at the Ministry of Finance.
Yeah, the sectorization exercise identifies whether SOEs should be inside or outside the general government sector, crystallizes some of the problems within the state-owned enterprises sector. This exercise required as a structural benchmark under the IMF's extended fund facility, assesses whether 241 SOEs should be sectorized as government units based on whether they can be considered commercial entities on economic rather than legal grounds. Overall, 196 of the SOEs, including ESCO, United Water Supply, Melioration of Georgia, and the Partnership Fund, are to be included within the general government sector. These results highlight the dependence of many SOEs on government funding, as well as the role of government in SOEs' management decisions.
Yes, a deeper analysis of the SOE sector identifies that underlying operating earnings among most of the big 6 SOEs are positive, but large recent and pending asset write-downs retard the sector. This is IMF's finding. Nevertheless, only one of the SOEs is generating sufficient operated profits to cover its capital costs, and others are making significant losses. Overall, the sector to IMF has drawn around 6% of GDP from the government budget over the past 5 years without contributing anything in the way of dividends, IMF says.
Okay, so to summarize, 18 state-owned enterprises did not act as an autonomous institutional units. 68 SOEs did not provide goods and services at economically significant prices. 16 state-owned enterprises depended on the regular financial assistance from government. 23 of them, owned by municipalities, were engaged in loss-making activities requiring government support, but for which data were not available to conduct the market-non-market test. And data were not available for the remaining 31 small SOEs, of which the majority, 48 of them, were inactive at all.
Yes, and as for the 6 large SOEs, which you already mentioned, Engur Hesi, Georgian Oil and Gas Company, Georgian Railway, Georgian State Electrosystem, Marabda Karzakhi Rail and United Water Supply Company, the IMF notes that these state-owned enterprises experienced a significant deterioration in their financial performance on average over the last 2 years. Much of the recent financial deterioration, as the IMF reports, of course, resulted from asset write-downs reflecting the permanent downgrade in expected future revenue generation.
And it should be noted, Elena, that the major factor accounting for the poor aggregate performance in 2018 was the 2% of GDP asset write-down by Georgia Railway. The IMF also finds that the aggregate net worth of the 6 large state-owned enterprises has declined from around 2.8 billion Georgian lari to under 1 billion over the last 6 years.
Yes, and finally, Georgi, even though the companies generally project their financial performance to improve over the next few years, with aggregate return on investment projected to increase to 6.9% by 2022. However, this outlook for the SOEs is optimistic, such as the assessment of the IMF. The companies as a group are projecting their average revenues to grow at an annual average rate of 12%, 50% higher than the projected rate of growth of nominal GDP. In some some cases this is warranted, IMF says. For example, GOGC will commission the Gardaban 2 thermal power plant that will increase revenue significantly. However, overall, the SOE's aggregate projected growth revenue of 12% stands in stark contrast with the 1% growth achieved over the last 2 years and is worthy of further examination, such as the final stamp of the IMF on SOEs.